Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Morning Bible. It is Wednesday today. It's Tuesday when I'm recording this, so I think it's Wednesday. I hope you're having good weeks. Praying over everything, praying over the NHS and everything that's going on around us. It's pretty scary, but equally we have a good God who carries us through times like this. So let's read what he has to say. Today we are in John chapter 7 once again, going from verse 18, and this one's we're in Luke today, chapter 7, going from verse 18, and we are finding out what's been happening to John, because if you remember, we had John the Baptist right at the start. He was born to Zechariah and Elizabeth. He came before Jesus, he baptized people, and prepared the way for Jesus, pointed to Jesus. But he was put into prison, and since he was put into prison, we've followed all of Jesus' ministry so far with his teachings and his healings and his miracles, etc. And so now we're going to find out what happened to John during that time. The disciples of John, so disciples just mean followers. It doesn't mean that he's sort of the Messiah or he's particularly special or anything like that. Disciples just means his followers. So the followers of John reported all these things to him. So John is in prison right now, still, and his disciples have to bring him accounts of what's happening. And John, calling two of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, saying, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" John's friends, they come to visit him in prison, and they tell him about all of the things that Jesus has been doing. They tell him about all these miracles, all the teachings, all the healings, etc. And John sends them back asking with a very simple message: "Are you the one, or shall we look for someone else? Are you the Messiah? Are you the Son of God come down? Are you are you the one that Scripture's been pointing to, Scripture's been talking about?" And it's really interesting that John asked this question, because he's John the Baptist, right? His whole purpose in the Bible right from the start was that he is going to prepare the way for Jesus. He's going to prepare the way for the Messiah. He's going to get things ready for Jesus to come. And so the fact that Jesus is now come and Jesus is acting and John doesn't recognise that's quite interesting. But we'll go into that a bit more later maybe. And when one of the men had come to him, so this is to Jesus now, and when one of the men had come to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, 'Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?'" So the phrase "who is to come" doesn't mean that you will be, it just means who is to come, who has been predicted to come. You're that one. In that hour, Jesus healed many people of diseases and plagues and evil spirits, and on many who were blind he bestowed sight. And he said to them, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf are healed, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me." So Jesus, instead of just answering, just saying, "Yes, I am," or sort of giving them this long speech, Jesus says, "All right, watch this." And he goes around this crowd and he heals people and restores sight and heals deafness and does all these incredible things, all these miracles that could only be done through God. He turns back to him and he's like, "Now go and tell them what you've seen." And this is quite an interesting way of doing it, because so often in our culture we the arguments that we have come across around God are about, why doesn't God just tell us who he is? Why doesn't he just give us some evidence? Why doesn't he just X, Y, Z? Jesus is literally doing that here. He isn't just standing there and saying, "I am God." He's saying, "No, look, here's all this evidence for who I am. Tell him everything you've seen and let him come to his own conclusions from that." Jesus doesn't walk in and tell him, "You have to believe me and I'm not going to give you any proof, I'm not going to give you any evidence." Jesus goes about and does a ton of miracles right in front of him, gives him loads and loads of evidence, and then says, "Make the decision for yourself." Which I think in general public perception, people think that's not what Jesus is like, which is quite interesting because he clearly is here. And so, yeah, I guess that's one of the challenges for today, of Do you in your belief in Jesus, do you treat it as someone telling you that he is God, that he is the Son of God, or do you actually pick apart the evidence and go and see for yourself? But there's still one passage, so let's keep going. When John's messengers had gone, Jesus began to speak to the crowds concerning John. So now Jesus, once John's friends have gone, Jesus turns around to the rest of the crowd and starts talking to them about John. He says to the people, he says, "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind?" Sorry. A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Behold, those who are dressed in splendid clothing and live in luxury are in the king's court. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, he is more than a prophet. So Jesus asks them a whole selection of questions here. He says, who did you go out into the wilderness to see? And the assumed answer is that people are saying no to most of these questions. So he says, a reed shaken by the wind. So that just means something frail, something that won't last, something that just gets buffeted around and weak and is shaken. And so the people would say no to that because they weren't going out seeking that. And so he says, what then? A man dressed in soft clothing? Because to see that, you don't go out into the wilderness. You see that in the king's courts. So what then did you go out to see? Prophets, to which the people would have, I'd assume, say yes, because Jesus then says yes. He says, yes, I tell you, he's more than a prophet. And Jesus goes on, this is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. I tell you, among those born of women, none is greater than John. Yet one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. So that's a really crazy thing to say. So he's saying, of those born of women, none is greater than John. So of all the people from this old covenant, this old system, none is greater than John. John is up there. He is brilliant. He is fantastic. He has such faith. He has such a heart for God. He's done so much good in the world. He's prepared the way. He's been such a faithful servant. He's been brilliant. Jesus is saying, he's tip top. Yet one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. And so Jesus is saying, like that was the old covenant, right? John was in the time before me, and from now on, we are building the kingdom of God together here on earth. This is the beginning of my rescue. This is the beginning of our salvation. A time where I come to save everyone. And so, Jesus is saying the person who is least in that plan, who comes and follows me, who is the least person in that plan, is greater than John the Baptist was in the old plan. How crazy is that? Like you can come to God, you can become a Christian, and you can really struggle with it and find it really difficult and not be very good at it, and all those things. But Jesus is saying it's not about your merits. It's not about how good you are at things. It's not about how much you give to charity, or how much you do this, how much you do this, how much you do this. Because Jesus is saying the fact that you're even following him puts you above John the Baptist, the guy who is called to prepare the way for Jesus. Because in God's kingdom, everyone is welcome, everyone is drawn in, and sometimes all it takes is faith as small as a mustard seed to do incredible, incredible things. So let's keep reading. When all the people heard this, and the tax collectors too, they declared God just, having been baptized with the baptism of John. But the Pharisees and the lawyers, so the first group of people are sort of people following Jesus, but also there were some sinners in there, so it calls out tax collectors specifically as people who are seen as not very nice people in society. But then the Pharisees and the lawyers, so these were the people who were much higher up, who had all of the old laws, all of the rules that were set out in the Old Testament, the teachers of those laws and the people who enforced them, those people rejected the purpose of God for themselves, not having been baptized by him. To what then shall I compare the people of this generation? Jesus goes on to say, to what then shall I compare the people of this generation? And what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not weep. So what does that mean? Well, we'll keep reading and we'll come back to it. For John the Baptist has come, eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say, he has a demon. The Son of God has come, eating and drinking, and you say, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is justified by all her children. So, what on earth does all that mean? So the last bit's the easiest bit to understand, to explain really. So I mentioned before how people were quite angry with John the Baptist first, because he lived in the wilderness and had this very sort of stripped back lifestyle where he didn't engage in all these things. People were saying, oh, there's something up with him, there's something wrong with that guy. And then Jesus comes along and doesn't exactly do the opposite. Like, he doesn't go like off the rails on the other side. But Jesus, he drinks some alcohol and he eats food with people and he spends time with people and he celebrates at weddings and he enjoys himself and he has a good time. And the people then criticize Jesus for being a drunkard and a glutton, someone who just constantly gorges themselves with food and things like that. And they get really angry with both of them. And so Jesus is saying, well, which way is it, kind of thing. And he says, yep, wisdom is justified by all her children. So, there's a really simple explanation at the bottom of my Bible. It says, wisdom, God's way, is justified, shown to be right by all her children, the followers of John and Jesus. So God's way is shown to be right by the followers of John and Jesus. So it's these people who show this way of living to be right, whether it's John's model of it or Jesus' model of it. The fruit that comes out of it is good fruit on both sides. And so Jesus is saying there isn't a hard and fast rule for which side of this thing you should be on, and you shouldn't be too far on either side, because you start to lose connection with the rest of the world. You start to lose you can go too far into being an actual glutton and an actual drunk if you go too far into the celebration side of things. And so what did it say before? So when I was talking about the flute, and you did not dance, and the dirge, you did not weep. So I'll read that little passage again. To what then shall I compare the people of this generation, and what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not weep. So, I'll read the notes from the bottom of my Bible again for this bit, because they're helpful. This generation does not refer to everyone then living, but the leaders and the others who rejected both John the Baptist and Jesus, and were still the dominant force in their culture. So, it's not referring to all of the people, it's not referring to their followers, it's referring to the people who have come and rejected Jesus and rejected John the Baptist. It goes on to say, in their rejection of both ascetic John and non-ascetic Jesus, we don't have to worry about that so much, they were like children refusing to play either a sad or a happy game. So that's kind of what it comes back to, is the flute and the you did not dance, that's the Jesus, that's the celebration, that's the enjoyment. And the dirge and you did not weep, that's the living in the wilderness that John was doing. It's sort of, we've given you both models and you didn't take either. You didn't dance for one and you didn't weep for the other. You didn't engage with either of them. You rejected both. Is Jesus saying basically, look, the kingdom of God can look different for different people. Overall it's the same, it's still strong, it's still connected, but it manifests itself in different ways. It can manifest itself in fasting, or it can manifest itself in celebrating and eating and drinking. But if you're choosing to accept neither of these strains, then what hope is that for you? So that's where this passage ends, which is quite sort of a powerful note to end on, but I'll just come back to the last sentence again where it says wisdom is justified by all her children. That's really good. God's way is shown to be right through the followers of John and through the followers of Jesus. And God's way is shown to be right, through all the people who have come since the Bible, all of the good that's been done through them. And sure, people people fall short and people aren't perfect in that, but there's so much good that's come out of God's ways and God's teaching. That yeah, it's been shown to be right, which is good. So yeah, I will leave it there, and yeah, it's Thursday tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah, Thursday for you tomorrow. So yeah, I will see you all then. Much love, take care of yourselves. Bye bye bye.